What if the biggest conflict in Little People, Big World, isn't what we've been shown on screen, but what's been quietly building behind the scenes? For years, fans of Little People, Big World have watched the complicated dynamic between Matt Roloff and Chris Marek unfold. On the surface, things seem civil, respectful even. Shared smiles, polite conversations, and moments that suggest a blended family trying to make it work. But longtime viewers know better. Because underneath that calm exterior, there's always been a question lingering in the background: is the piece real, or just for the cameras? And now, that question is getting louder. Across fan communities, a new theory is gaining traction, one that's stirring serious debate. Some believe that Matt may not be as supportive of Chris as he appears, and that deep down, there could be resentment tied to more than just family history. Could it be possible that Matt, knowingly or not, wants Chris to struggle financially? It sounds dramatic, maybe even unfair. But when you take a closer look at everything that's happened, from the emotional divide after the divorce from Amy Roloff, to the ongoing tension surrounding Roloff Farms, to the subtle shifts in body language and decision-making, the idea doesn't feel so easy to dismiss anymore. Because this isn't just about money. It's about legacy. It's about control. And most importantly, it's about who truly belongs in the future of the Roloff family. In today's video, we're breaking down everything, from the history that started it all to the small but telling moments fans can't stop talking about. The clues are there. The tension is real. And if you've been paying attention closely, you might start to see this rivalry in a completely different light. And that's where the tension really starts to deepen. Because for Matt, the farm wasn't just land or a financial asset. It was his legacy. Every structure, every attraction, every piece of land carried years of effort, risk, and vision. So when Amy began seriously considering selling her share, it wasn't just a practical decision. It felt like a shift in control. And Chris Marek's presence in that process made everything more complicated. From the outside, Chris appeared calm, supportive, and grounded. He wasn't confrontational. He didn't openly challenge Matt. But at the same time, he was there, standing beside Amy as she made one of the biggest decisions of her life. And that alone may have changed the dynamic. Because for years, it had always been Matt and Amy navigating the farm together, even after their separation. There was still a shared understanding, a history that shaped how decisions were made. But now, there was a new voice in the room. A voice that didn't carry the same emotional weight. A voice that could look at the situation more objectively. And sometimes, that kind of perspective can be both helpful and unsettling. Especially for someone like Matt, who had poured so much of himself into the farm's identity. The situation became even more intense when discussions about buying Amy's portion began to take shape. What should have been a straightforward transaction quickly turned into something far more complicated. There were disagreements over price, differences in expectations, and underlying it all, a sense that this wasn't just business. It was the final chapter of a shared life being divided. For Amy, selling her share represented closure, a chance to move forward, to build a new life with Chris, free from the emotional ties of the past. But for Matt, it may have felt like something was slipping away. Not just ownership, but influence. Because once Amy sold her portion, the balance would shift entirely. And Chris's role in supporting that decision, whether intentional or not, placed him in a position that Matt couldn't ignore. Even if nothing was said directly, the dynamics had changed. Subtly, quietly, but permanently. And fans began to notice. They saw the polite conversations, the careful interactions, the moments where everything seemed fine, but maybe just a little too controlled. Because sometimes, the biggest tensions aren't the ones that explode. They're the ones that sit just beneath the surface, unspoken, unresolved, and constantly evolving. And in this case, the farm became more than just a setting. It became the center of a silent power shift. A place where past, present, and future were all colliding at once. And right in the middle of it, all stood three people trying to navigate something that was never going to be simple. As that decision unfolded, the situation became far more complex than a simple property transaction. For Matt, regaining full control of Roloff Farms wasn't just about business, it was deeply personal. This was the land he had spent decades developing, expanding, and turning into a recognizable brand. Every structure, every attraction, every investment carried his vision. So when Amy agreed to sell her portion, it may have felt like he was finally restoring something he believed had been divided. But control often comes with a cost. Because while Matt now had full ownership, he also absorbed the full financial responsibility. Maintaining a property like Roloff Farms isn't cheap. Between upkeep, staffing, seasonal events, and long-term development plans, the financial pressure likely intensified the moment that deal was finalized. What once was shared responsibility now rested entirely on his shoulders. And this is where the power dynamic subtly shifts. Amy, having stepped away from ownership, also stepped away from that financial burden. She gained independence, both emotionally and financially, in a way she hadn't had before. No longer tied to the daily stress of the farm, she could focus on building a new chapter of her life. And standing beside her through that transition was Chris. Which brings us back to the question many fans continue to ask: what role did Chris really play? On the surface, Chris appeared calm, supportive, and respectful of Amy's decisions. He wasn't publicly pushing for anything. He wasn't making bold statements about the farm. But sometimes influence doesn't look like control. It looks like quiet reassurance. Think about it. Major life decisions, especially ones involving finances and long-term stability, are rarely made in isolation. Even when someone says, "This is my choice," that choice is often shaped by conversations behind closed doors, by advice, by perspective, by emotional support. And Chris, as Amy's partner, would naturally be part of those conversations. So while there's no clear evidence that he directly influenced the sale, it's not unreasonable to believe that his presence helped Amy feel more confident in letting go, in moving forward, in choosing a life that didn't revolve around the farm anymore. From one angle, that's a positive thing. But from another, especially from Matt's perspective, it could feel very different. Because if Matt sees the farm as his life's legacy, then anyone who played even a small role in changing its ownership structure could be viewed as a disruptor. Not necessarily an enemy, but not entirely neutral either. And that's where the tension becomes less about money and more about meaning. To Matt, the farm represents years of sacrifice, vision, and identity. To Amy, it may have come to represent something else entirely, a chapter that had run its course. And Chris, intentionally or not, became part of that transition. Which raises another layer to this theory. If Matt believes that Chris helped Amy step away from the farm, then he might also associate him with a loss, not just of partnership, but of shared history, of the version of the farm that once belonged to both of them. And that kind of loss doesn't always show up as open conflict. Sometimes it lingers beneath the surface, in small interactions, in subtle distance, in the kind of politeness that never quite turns into genuine warmth. At the same time, Matt's position isn't without its own complications. Having full control means having full authority, but also facing full risk. Every decision now reflects solely on him. Every success is his, but so is every setback. And if the farm were to face financial challenges, there's no longer a shared cushion to fall back on. That pressure can change a person's mindset. It can make them more protective, more strategic, more aware of who is inside their circle and who is. So when fans speculate about underlying tension, they're often looking at these deeper dynamics. Not just who said what on camera, but what these decisions represent behind the scenes. Because in reality, this isn't just about land. It's about control versus freedom. It's about legacy versus moving on. And it's about how one major decision, Amy selling her share, reshaped the balance of power in a way that continues to influence relationships today. As this story moves forward, one question remains at the center of it all. Did Matt truly gain everything he wanted when he took full control of the farm? Or did that victory come with consequences he never expected? Script continuation 30-0045-00. Because when you look beyond the surface, the situation isn't just about personalities. It's about control, legacy, and influence. And that's exactly where fans believe things start to get complicated. There's a growing theory among viewers that Matt has always viewed the farm as more than just property. It's his life's work, his identity, the one thing he built, expanded, and fought to maintain over decades. So when someone new enters that space, especially someone like Chris, who didn't share in those early struggles, it can create an invisible divide. Not necessarily open conflict, but something quieter, something harder to define. And fans think they've spotted it. In group scenes, there are moments where conversations seem just slightly off. Chris might make a comment, and Matt responds, but not quite in the way you'd expect. There's a pause, a subtle hesitation, sometimes even a shift in body language that suggests discomfort rather than connection. It's not dramatic, it's not explosive, but it's there. And viewers have picked up on it over time. Some have pointed out that Matt often appears more relaxed and expressive when Chris isn't around. His tone feels lighter, his jokes come more naturally. But when Chris enters the dynamic, things seem to tighten, like there's an unspoken awareness in the room. Almost as if both men are carefully choosing their words, carefully managing how they come across. Because at the end of the day, they're not just two individuals, they're connected through a complicated family history. And that history carries weight. Now, when you bring Amy into the picture, the dynamic becomes even more layered. Chris isn't just a new presence, he's Amy's partner, her support system, the person standing beside her after a very public and emotional chapter of her life. So any tension between Matt and Chris doesn't exist in isolation. It affects everything. Family gatherings, farm decisions, even the way conversations unfold on camera. And that's where fans begin to ask a deeper question. Is this really just about personality differences? Or is there something more strategic happening beneath the surface? Because when discussions about the farm come up, ownership, finances, future plans, Chris's presence suddenly carries a different kind of significance. He may not have built the farm, but through Amy, he's connected to it. And in a situation where land, money, and legacy are all intertwined, that connection matters. Some fans believe Matt is very aware of this. They speculate that while he remains outwardly respectful, there may be an underlying concern about influence, about how much say Chris might have in decisions that Matt considers deeply personal. Not because Chris has directly challenged him, but because of what he represents. A new voice, a new perspective, and potentially a shift in power. There's also the question of respect. Viewers have debated whether Matt truly sees Chris as an equal within the family dynamic, or simply as someone who married into it. And while nothing has been explicitly stated, certain interactions have fueled that speculation. Moments where Chris offers input, and Matt doesn't fully engage. Moments where conversations feel more transactional than warm. Moments where politeness replaces genuine connection. It's subtle, but in a show where audiences have watched these relationships evolve for years, even subtle changes stand out. Social media has only amplified these observations. Fans break down clips, analyze expressions, and compare interactions across different seasons. They look for patterns, consistency in tone, body language, and behavior. And one phrase keeps coming up over and over again. Polite but distant. It's the kind of dynamic that doesn't explode into arguments, but also never fully settles into comfort. A middle ground, where respect exists, but closeness doesn't. And that can sometimes be even more telling than open conflict, because it suggests something unresolved, something that hasn't been addressed directly, but is still very much present. Of course, it's important to remember that reality TV only shows a fraction of what actually happens. Editing plays a role. Scenes are condensed. Conversations are shaped for storytelling. But even with that in mind, the consistency of these observations has kept the conversation alive among fans. And as the show continues, people are watching more closely than ever, looking for those small moments, those quiet signals, those brief interactions that might reveal what's really going on beneath the surface. Because in a story like this, it's not always the big dramatic scenes that tell the truth. Sometimes it's the pauses, the glances, the things that aren't said. And as the tension between legacy, family, and control continues to unfold, fans are starting to wonder if those silent moments are pointing towards something much bigger. Something that hasn't fully come to light yet. But to really understand why this theory has gained so much traction among fans, you have to look at the deeper emotional layers beneath it. Because this isn't just about money. It's about control, identity, and legacy. For years, Matt has been at the center of everything tied to the farm. It wasn't just his business. It was his vision, his project, his life's work. Every structure, every expansion, every big decision carried his signature. And even after the divorce, even after the shifts in family dynamics, that sense of ownership didn't just disappear. So when Chris entered the picture, not just as Amy's partner, but as someone gradually becoming part of the farm's decision-making environment, it introduced something unfamiliar: shared influence. And for someone like Matt, who has spent decades building and leading, that kind of shift can be complicated. Now, that doesn't mean there's any intentional plan or desire to harm Chris financially. But fans don't always interpret things at face value. Instead, they look at patterns, subtle interactions, and emotional undercurrents. And what they see, rightly or wrongly, is a quiet tension rooted in power. Because in this situation, financial stability isn't just about money. It represents independence. It represents voice. It represents the ability to stand firm in decisions without needing approval or support from anyone else. So when fans talk about this bankruptcy theory, what they're really suggesting is this: if Chris were ever in a position where he lacked stability, whether financial or otherwise, it could weaken his influence in the family dynamic. It could make his role less central, less impactful. And in turn, that could shift the balance back toward Matt. Not through conflict, not through confrontation, but through circumstance. That's what makes the theory feel so compelling to some viewers. It's not about something happening openly. It's about what could happen quietly, in the background, without ever being directly addressed. At the same time, there's another side to this. Because everything we've seen publicly suggests that Chris is steady, grounded, and relatively independent. He's not someone who appears to be seeking control or dominance. If anything, his approach has often seemed measured, supportive of Amy, but not aggressively inserting himself into the farm's legacy. Which raises an important question. Is this entire theory simply a projection from fans? In reality TV, viewers often fill in the blanks. When conversations feel incomplete or interactions seem slightly off, people create narratives to make sense of what they're seeing. And sometimes, those narratives grow far beyond what's actually happening. It's possible that what fans interpret as tension is simply the natural awkwardness of a blended family navigating complicated history. It's possible that what feels like a power struggle is really just adjustment. And it's also possible that Matt, despite his strong personality and deep connection to the farm, has no interest in undermining Chris at all. But here's the thing: perception matters. And when a show has run for as long as this one has, viewers become deeply invested. They start reading between the lines. They start noticing the smallest details. A pause in conversation. A carefully chosen word. A moment that feels just slightly off. And from those small details, bigger theories begin to take shape. The bankruptcy idea is one of those theories. Not because it's proven, but because it taps into something deeper, something emotional and unresolved. It reflects the lingering question at the heart of everything. Who really holds the power now? Is it still Matt, the original builder of the farm and the driving force behind its success? Or has that power shifted, subtly, gradually, into a more shared space where others, including Chris, now have a voice? And if that shift is happening, how does Matt truly feel about it? That's the question fans keep coming back to. Because whether this theory is true, exaggerated, or completely off base, it reveals something important about how viewers see this dynamic. Not as simple, not as settled, but as something still evolving, still carrying tension, still leaving room for interpretation. And as long as those unanswered questions remain, theories like this won't disappear. If anything, they'll only continue to grow. At the end of the day, what we're witnessing between Matt Roloff and Chris Marek may not fit into a simple narrative of rivalry or resentment. Because real life, especially within a family as layered as the Roloffs, is rarely that straightforward. What we're seeing instead feels like something much more nuanced. A quiet tension shaped by years of history, shifting roles, and emotional attachments that never fully disappear. Matt isn't just an ex-husband. He's the original architect of the farm, the person who poured decades of vision, effort, and identity into building something meaningful. And for someone like him, letting go, whether it's control, influence, or even symbolic ownership, isn't easy. Chris, on the other hand, represents a new chapter, a different energy, a new presence in a space that was once defined entirely by Matt and Amy's partnership. Even if unintentional, that alone can create friction. But what makes this situation so compelling is that none of it is openly addressed. There are no explosive confrontations, no dramatic showdowns, no clear statements of conflict. Instead, everything exists in the subtle moments. The pauses, the body language, the carefully chosen words. And sometimes, what isn't said speaks louder than anything else. That's why fans continue to speculate, not because they're trying to create drama, but because they're trying to understand what feels just slightly out of place. Is there lingering resentment? Is there a quiet power struggle? Or is this simply the natural discomfort of two very different men, navigating the same emotional space? The bankruptcy theory itself may not be meant to be taken literally. It's less about financial ruin and more about what it represents. Control, legacy, influence. For some viewers, it symbolizes the idea that Matt may struggle with seeing Chris fully settled and secure in a life that was once his own. But it's important to remember, these are interpretations, not confirmed truths. What we see on screen is only a fraction of reality. Behind every edited episode are countless unseen conversations, private moments, and personal dynamics we may never fully understand. And yet, that's exactly what keeps people watching. Because the story of the Roloff family isn't static. It's evolving. Relationships are shifting, roles are changing, and with every new development, new questions emerge. Maybe there isn't a clear answer. Maybe there isn't a single truth to uncover. Maybe what we're really seeing is something far more human, two individuals connected by circumstance, navigating a complicated emotional landscape in their own ways. And that complexity is what makes it real. So whether these theories hold any weight, or simply reflect the curiosity of a deeply invested fan base, one thing is certain. People are paying attention. And as long as this story continues to unfold, fans will keep watching closely, analyzing every moment, searching for meaning in the smallest details. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't the ones filled with loud conflict. They're the ones built on silence, subtlety, and everything left unsaid. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.